This week in Texas politics, we saw a lot of verbal fistfights, some chemtrail turmoil, and some laws literally going up in smoke. Let's get the headlines from our panel, and we'll begin first with Brian Smith from St. Edward's University. Brian, what's your headline?
After what seems like a lifetime of legislative sessions, school choice becomes a reality.
Political analyst Karina Kling, what's your headline for the week?
I think I'm sticking with that same theme. Governor Abbott finally gets his private school vouchers win.
And Philip Jankowski from the Dallas Morning News, give me a headline.
Yeah, same deal. School choice wins.
And we'll start off with that. Governor Greg Abbott got his school choice bill sent to his desk. Brian, there's a lot of political blood on that bill.
Yeah, the governor outright threatened Republicans with vetoes. They brought in the president of the United States, and now it's up to the governor to make it work. And the opponents are going to be watching this, the costs, the outcomes, everything, and be ready to pounce if it falls short of its goal. Expect this to be a talking point for any and all things public education, especially when it goes bad.
Philip, what's your take on all this?
My take really is about the political dynamics in Austin now with this passing. My sources are really talking about a sort of power shift with the governor kind of looking more powerful than ever within the Capitol. As Brian mentioned, there was some, he wouldn't call it threats, he would call it advocating, but I talked to people that have been involved in the Texas political scene for decades, and they are sitting there telling me that for the first time ever, they're seeing Abbott as the top most powerful person in Texas, above Dan Patrick in crafting legislative policy. This victory, I think, really kind of, puts a period on that point.
During the concurrence hearing in the Senate, Senator Charles Perry voiced concerns about the plan, saying we're going to find a lot about it in about 2 years. Karina, that what next? Boy, that's a huge unanswered question.
Yeah, and I'll just stem off of what both Brian and Phil said. I think Phil's right. It just kind of signals Governor Abbott's power on this issue, although Patrick has been pushing this for a long time as well. But to that point, the program will officially launch at the start of the 26-27 school year. The program is capped at $1 billion through the first biennium, but the estimates show it could cost as much as $4 billion by 2030. So that has lawmakers concerned. I think that's why they put the $1 billion cap on it this time around. I expect that to be revisited each session. And then, as you mentioned, Senator Perry was specifically raising concerns about the removal of guardrails to limit online private schools participation. And he's concerned about, what we saw during the pandemic with kids who remained remote learning, not doing as well as their peers on some of those state tests and academic standards. He wants the state to track virtual school participation. So I think that there's going to be a lot that lawmakers revisit in the next after the next 2 years when they see kind of how this program is implemented and who all takes part in it.
Legislation creating a special dementia research initiative group passed this week. That's the good news. The bad news, its funding bill involving legislation for a constitutional amendment may fall victim to some school choice payback by Democrats. This tactic may also deep six some bail bond reform. Philip, this is a strange political hill to fight and die on for Democrats. What are your sources saying about all this?
Yeah, don't forget homestead exemptions too. There's a lot of really popular things that could be held up by this tactic. To sort of explain, essentially, Democrats don't wield very much power in the legislature, but one place where they can really sort of make a stand is on constitutional amendments. And in the House, they're experimenting with that idea. You need a 2/3 majority in order to get a constitutional amendment passed so it can go to voters. And Democrats have a little more than 60 members in that 150-member chamber, so they're able to block all of these if they want to. Leading up to the school choice vote, they said they would do that if they didn't get their way on an amendment that would have forced that issue to a vote. Now you're seeing these constitutional amendments come up and get delayed. And Monday, which is where a bunch of them got delayed to, is where you could really see a standoff. And there was a test vote this week on a very uncontroversial bill, and Democrats showed that they had still enough votes there to stop that one from moving to full approval. So We'll see if they're able to hold up against that. But as I said, there's a lot of very popular policy that is being pushed, and they could be blamed for stopping it.
Yeah, Brian, this could be a long shot bluff, or it could be a game of chicken that's going to serve up a special session. What's your gut feeling on this?
Yeah, when like Phil was saying, when you're in the minority party, you have to try every tactic. Previously, they had left the state. That's kind of run dry. So this is a new wrinkle. And I think as long as the Democrats are not obstructing very, very popular amendments, this is something that they might use going forward. But once they start like going after things that people really want, then they're going to look obstructionist. But both parties know the Texas Constitution lives through the amendment process, and legislators need amendments to bring this 150-year-old document into the 21st century and address these problems that weren't imagined in 1876. And if the Democrats are seen as stopping bills or amendments that people really want, then it might hurt them. But if they're just stopping pet projects, then I think they're going to keep up with this tactic.
Karina, is it too soon to say panic button needs to be hit?
Well, I mean, it's leverage, right? And it's really the only leverage they have at this point. So try to work it, see what you can get out of it. I mean, it does come with political risks, as Brian and Phil are alluding to. But I'll also note it wasn't a constitutional amendment. But I mean, look at last session. They went through and took hostage of the school vouchers, Democrats and those rural Republicans who banded together. And when that got tied to boosting funding for public education, I mean, both went by the wayside. Democrats, were seen as champions for public schools, even though they didn't get that money. They stopped school vouchers from happening. So I think they're willing to take the risk, and we'll see kind of how it all pans out in the end.
Another marijuana decriminalization effort went up in smoke this week. A state appeals court ruling against an Austin ordinance, which follows a loss for San Marcos, similar ordinance last week. Philip, this is a reminder that home rule just kind of goes so far, but this fight's not over, right?
Yeah, well, the question of local control, you've really seen Republicans kind of abandon that in recent years. So this was a court fight, but in the legislature, you've got, a lot of real action that has been taken to rein in progressive policies from municipalities that they've tried to enact through, their local legislators or county commissions or whatnot. And this is sort of, Republicans used to champion things like local control. Now you actually see a lot of them being more antagonistic towards that, saying, no, we believe in, when we say local control, we mean state control is what they mean. But that being said, things like, do you still see, like, I guess Austin, a good example is the bag ban in Austin. Like, that got overturned by the legislature. But when you go to the grocery store, you still bring your own bags, at least if you're shopping in Austin, like I am. So you can still see, like, lingering effects from some of these so-called progressive policies hang on even after the legislature bats them down.
Yeah, Karina, but in this session, they're giving the Attorney General some power to go after these communities now. Is that the difference?
I mean, maybe we'll see. But, to Philip's point, appeals courts haven't been ruling in favor of the cities. I think no big surprises there. Some cities are saying it's not worth it to take on the state. And I think Elgin, for example, when he brings up the bag ban, I mean, they resolved Paxton's lawsuit against the city via consent decree, meaning like neither side is claiming guilt or liability. So we may see more of that, and just, some of the progressive, so-called progressive policies remain in place to an extent. I mean, cities argue this is about focusing resources on more serious crimes and not going after these low-level drug offenses. And I think, we'll see if they put those resources towards that, whichever way is ruled upon.
Yeah, Brian, Philip kind of brought this up. It is a flip in political philosophy by the Republicans, champions of small government, and now it's, hey, the big government stick.
Yeah, there's a real difference, though, between state and federal relationships where both have very prescribed powers, and state and local where it's more of a parent and a child. And home rule really only goes as far as the state's willing to let it. And when you conflict with that state law, and especially the political agenda of our attorney general and a Republican court, you're going to get slapped. And if you're somebody like Austin, who's done it multiple times, you know they're specifically going to target you. And home rule again here in Texas, the state really is the parent and the cities are the child. And like any parent, you give your child some leeway, but you don't give them anarchy.
What's in a name? Well, a few political actions under the Capitol Dome tried to answer that this week. We had votes on legislation to rebrand the New York Strip steak to the Texas Strip, and Texas jumped in on flipping the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. You know, Karina, in Mexico, the Rio Grande is called the Rio Bravo. So do the guys up in New York, do they have, and I'm sorry for saying this, do they have the real beef in this fight?
Well, let me just say in my very detailed research of how the New York Strip got its name, I learned that it was a popular menu item on the menu in many New York City restaurants, and so it stuck to be the New York Strip. So I suppose Texas can do what it wants with renaming it the Texas Strip. I think at least one restaurant's already done that and made it that on the menu, but look, I mean, at the end of the day, I think that there are more pressing issues to worry about in the state. I think it's kind of a fun back and forth on some of these issues, as we see with bets on games among governors and various things like that. But probably some more pressing issues we need to be focused on here in the state.
Yeah, Philip, but an Albany restaurant owner is threatening a lawsuit, and on Friday, holding a news conference with state lawmakers up there in New York. You know, they're ready to fight this thing out.
Yeah, I guess they are. You know what I think about all of this, and specifically to the Gulf of America, because we had some legislation move forward on that, is that it really just kind of signifies, specifically with the Gulf of America, that the Texas GOP is willing to do basically embrace anything that Trump does. And so, you know, like nobody had made this an issue ever until Trump just sort of threw it out there. Now it's the Gulf of America, and suddenly everybody was supremely supportive of it. And it points out sort of the attitude that you see amongst a lot of, you know, Republicans. What comes immediately to mind is Congressman Troy Nehls, who said, you know, who said if Trump told him to jump 3 feet into the air, he would do it, and that Trump is always right about everything. And so it's a small thing. It's not very important, but it's something that you see people, Republicans, willing to take on these unimportant issues just to show how much they love our president.
Little chest thumping there, or do you agree with Philip there, Brian, that this is more about walking lockstep with Trump?
Well, for one, I think it's good to see that we got these small issues like the budget and school choice out of the way so we can really focus on what matters. And I miss freedom fries. And this is a lot of chest thumping. And, you know, New York loves poking at Texas, just like we like poking at other states. So I think there is a lot of that friendly interstate rivalry, but I don't expect it being a Supreme Court decision over a cut of beef.
Freedom fries. Why don't we change that? No more French fries, freedom fries.
I know, you know, freedom fries was such a hot topic for a while, and then it, you know, it's just kind of like, oh, we like France again. No, we don't. Yeah, we do, but I still like my French fries. Well, earlier this week, the Senate gave initial approval on a bill to track cost that incurred by undocumented migrants on Texas. Democrats argued that the study should also document the annual benefits of migration. Brian, was this a missed opportunity for some bipartisan friendship type thing, or was this really something to fight over?
Now, this is a real partisan issue. Everybody knows it's short-sighted just to look at the costs. And also, we don't know how many people are in Texas who are unauthorized. So any report's going to be partisan to the core, and expect this document to show that immigrants are a huge drain on Texas because we're only looking at one side of the issue and through one lens.
Karina, missed opportunity, you know, to add that, you know, let's show the benefits too, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll note the only time the state conducted such an assessment 2 decades ago, it found that undocumented Texans contributed more to the state's economy than they cost the state. That was Republican Carol Keaton Strayhorn who had that study done 2 decades ago. Similar studies have been done since by universities and research groups, and they've shown similar results. It still has to go to the House for a vote, and I suspect the same argument will be taken up there too. But I mean, it's going to be a partisan issue, and whether or not this moves forward, you know, I think studying all of this and maybe a similar study to what was done 2 decades ago is just not going to happen in this Republican-led state at this point.
But the big difference this time is that huge migrant surge that took place during the Biden administration. That was massive and that was different. That was historic. So why not do the count, Philip?
I mean, you don't do the count because you're trying to build a narrative. That's what you're trying to do. Take, for instance, we had something that broke this morning. There's you guys might remember Abbott asked hospitals to sort of track how much money they spend on treating undocumented immigrants. And so the HHSC came out with this report that they released this morning, say it cost them like $121 million. I don't know the full details of it and the amount of time that they were doing it. My colleague Aaron Torres is all over this, but he pointed out that this order from the government only asked them to check how much the total expenditures were, not whether they were actually paying for it or whether they were part or whether they had insurance. And so the governor's office says, look at the undocumented immigrants are taxing, are straining our healthcare, but we don't actually know how much. The whole point was just to get that one number and not really take into account things that might mitigate that number. And so I see this bill as just another way to do that, to get the one number that bolsters Republicans' position and not really look at the full story.
The House pushed out a school cell phone bill. It even includes restricting smartwatches. I've seen support for this idea, but I also think it could be a paper tiger. Karina, what's your take? How do you enforce this thing, really?
Yeah, I mean, I think, teachers have had questions about that and concerns about that, and school districts will work that out. I think the idea is for students to focus on school and not to be distracted by these devices. It's got bipartisan support. I think it's a good idea. We all survived without cell phones. Maybe I'm dating myself, but I didn't have a cell phone in elementary or high school. Finally got one when I went off to college. But I think one of the key arguments that also has been raised, aside from policing it and enforcing it, is just the ability for students to have a device on them to be able to contact them very quickly at school. So maybe some communications and some issues that may need to be worked out there with schools as well, in terms of being able to get a hold of your student very quickly. But again, we were all able to manage it, a few decades ago. I think they'll figure it out this time too.
Back in the day when I walked 100 miles through the snow, Karina Kling didn't have a smartwatch. I'm joking. Hey, Philip, the smartwatch thing, that was a curveball for me. I didn't see that one coming. I think that's going to be really hard to enforce. Don't you agree?
Well, not for me, because I've got a knockoff $12 Casio right here. But I think it could be. I don't know that it will be. You see in some of these school districts that have already enacted things like this, that you take the thing, you put it in like a plastic holder, and then the kids are allowed to take it with them. So the parents ended up being appeased because they can still see where their child is through like the locator apps and things like that. So I don't think it will be as hard as I think there might be parents that are going to express a lot of grievances over it, and then they're probably going to find out that this is not as hard as they think it's going to be. And just to sort of date myself, I had a pager when I was in high school, and they were banned in my high school, and we got by just fine without it. One more point to add to that: I kind of wish we could just ban all social media to the entire state, if possible. I think that would make things a lot more civil. And you do see a lot of the horror stories surrounding cell phones in schools relates to social media bullying and things like that. So could be a positive thing.
Brian, you're a teacher by trade. What do you think? What are you hearing?
Well, again, I think the hardest thing is going to be the enforcement. We're turning this over to thousands of schools across the state. We ask a lot of our educators, and this is just one more thing. I didn't get a cell phone until I was in my mid-30s, so I'm really behind the curve there. But on a positive, I remember when Texas enacted the cell phone while driving ban, and we thought that was going to be the end of the world, and we were never going to be able to tell people we're running late, but we all survived. And I think done properly, we'll survive this.
State lawmakers took up some climate and energy related bills, pushing natural gas, no surprise there, restricting renewables, no surprise there, with the exception of nuclear power. They love nuclear power, apparently. We also had a hearing on a bill that would ban seeding the atmosphere with reflective particles to address climate change. Philip, you did a series of articles on this topic of climate. What was the thing that most notable that came out of that?
What came out of that, and I appreciate you bringing it up, but what came out of it to me that I found most interesting, which I think at least what ties into the legislation out there, is that you're seeing Republicans go after renewable energy in a way. Well, they tried it in 2023, but this session it really seems like it's advancing. They want to do things like um, siting requirements, so it would make it much harder to build. There's a bill that passed, well, not passed, but that advanced out of committee this week that really has a lot of people in the renewables space panicking, that would essentially assign a lot of costs retroactively to things that are already on the grid. And so you have like one wing of the leadership saying we need an all of the above, we need all of the power that we can get, especially in light of these concerning demand projections coming from ERCOT. But at the same time, they really only want one kind of power generation, that's natural gas. But it's just not being built. What's being built quickly is solar power and batteries. And those, as I explained in one of the articles in the series, those can kind of work together to create in symbiosis something akin to what a natural gas plant could do, something able to offer power 24 hours a day. But there's a lot of work to really undo a lot of the rapid expansion that has happened in the past, really in the past 24 months.
Well, along with the energy issues, this was moving day, moving week for a lot of bills. There was a $200,000 homestead exemption bill for the elderly that moved forward this week. SB 17, the ban on land sales to hostile nations, that's made some movement. The Doge Texas style, first major bill of the session to move to the governor's desk. Karina, are there any other items that really caught your attention this week?
Yes, legislature related, not necessarily a bill they're working on, but A through F school ratings finally released after a 19-month legal battle. Showed 1 in 5 schools getting a D or F rating under these new performance standards. I mean, that sets the stage for possible consequences for some of the schools. So a lot to look into there, and parents and educators finally getting a chance to kind of take a look at this and reassess. A lot of controversy over these A through F ratings in the past, and kind of we'll see how all this shakes out moving forward as well.
Brian, what caught your attention this week?
Well, it looks like destination casinos are not going to pass again this year. So they'll try in 2 years. And I guess all the talk about the Mavericks moving all up in smoke. But I'm still really confused about the Doge bill, considering that we have a pretty lean state that doesn't spend a lot of money. We have a unified government of Republicans for 20 years that's tried to rein in government spending. And we have a sunset commission. So I just see this as a lot of political talk without a lot of substance.
You can see this full discussion on the Fox 7 YouTube page, but let's wrap everything up now with one word for the week, and we'll start off with Karina. Karina, what's your word for the week?
Yeah, with the month of May just around the corner, things starting to move more quickly, I'm going to say accelerated.
I didn't think I would ever say this, but measles.
Yeah, and in the same vein as Karina, I'll say coffee.
And that is This Week in Texas Politics.